Um, Ali, speaking of consequences, you wrote a couple of pieces very recently about the economic consequences that businesses who are either Israeli owned or do business with Israel are facing because of public revulsion around the world to Israel's genocide. Can you give us a sense of what's happening, for example, with let's see, the Japanese corporation Itochu taking a decision to end its partnership with the Israeli weapons maker Elbit by the end of this month.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So we can start there. There's actually a lot to talk about, but let's
yeah,
start with Itochu. This is one of these Japanese firms that most of us have never heard of, but it is a conglomerate that um, is involved in everything from textiles to consumer goods to mining to aviation, and probably owns a lot of companies and brands we have heard of. So this is a huge company. And they announced just this week that they are ending an agreement with Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest private weapons manufacturer, and which has made many of the weapons that Israel is using now in its genocide in Gaza. And Tsuyoshi Hachimura, the chief financial officer at Itochu, said that the partnership with Elbit was, quote, based on a request from Japan's defense ministry for the purpose of importing defense equipment for the self-defense forces of Japan, necessary for Japan's security, and is not in any way related to the current conflict between Israel and Palestine. In other words, their agreement pre-existed the genocide. It was actually an agreement signed in March of last year.
mm,
And at the time it was signed, the Israeli ambassador hailed it as evidence of, quote, deepening relations between Israel and Japan, relations that are based on mutual interests and shared values, end quote. But the decision to end the relationship taken by Itochu clearly is related to the genocide in Gaza. And this is what Tsuyoshi Hachimura of the company said. He said, quote, taking into consideration the International Court of Justice's order on 26 January and that the Japanese government supports the role of the court, we have already suspended new activities related to the Memorandum of Understanding with Elbit and plan to end the Memorandum of Understanding by the end of February. So that's extremely significant.
it is. Uh, what do you like? After the International Court of Justice's ruling, the significance of a major corporation not wanting to be implied, in the complicity
Yeah.
with genocide. I mean, do you think that other corporations will follow suit? Sometimes it just takes one for a domino effect.
Well, it's already happening, and it's not just corporations, because the other announcement this week was that the government of Wallonia, which is one of Belgium's 3 federal regions, suspended arms export licenses to Israel. And it also explicitly cited the ICJ decision, which, as people will recall, ordered preventive measures based on its finding that Israel is plausibly accused of genocide. And I think that it's one thing for people to be critical of Israel, but when you have the world's highest court coming and saying, we think that there may well be genocide here, now all of a sudden people are saying, well, what are the legal consequences for me or for my company? And I don't want to be mixed up in genocide.
Right.
So there is also a history. I think there's a context here, which is that key rulings from the International Court of Justice in the case of Namibia, and this is going back now to the early and mid 1970s, and South Africa's apartheid had that effect. Those rulings, even though, as we've said, that the International Court of Justice by itself cannot enforce its rulings. They don't have a world police force that can go out. These rulings nonetheless have a significant impact because they place a legal responsibility on others. If you'll remember, Nora, when we spoke to legal expert Susan Akram and Michael Link about the ICJ ruling, they both predicted that these sorts of decisions would start to follow.
Right.
We also saw this week the foreign minister of Spain, actually just yesterday, told Al Jazeera that that Spain has had frozen arms exports to Israel actually since October 7th. So we see governments starting to do this. Is it enough? Absolutely not. Oh, another victory is that announced by Palestine Action. That's the direct action group in the UK, and we've spoken to them on the Electronic Intifada live stream. They announced that they were notified by 𝐓𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐿, which is a major Swiss-based international shipping and logistics company, that it had also ended its contract with Elbit Systems and will not be working with the Israeli weapons maker again. And this followed a number of actions by Palestine Action activists at various 𝐓𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐿 offices and properties around the UK, which involved smashing windows, spray painting the inside, breaking into their offices. That's from Palestine Action's press release. And as we know, Palestine Action has been doing these sorts of activities for years, targeting Elbit Systems, and repeatedly its activists have been criminally prosecuted by authorities in the UK for damaging property and breaking and entering and so on, and have been acquitted because they've successfully argued in court that their actions are to prevent a greater crime of genocide. And so this shows, relating back to our conversation with Hazami, that this kind of direct action, of course, people are making decisions about staying on, which side of the law they're on. And Palestine Action has shown that they are on the right side of the law with these actions, as the acquittals have shown, that they actually do have an impact. So we're seeing governments now, corporations taking these actions, but let's remember that it is at the grassroots that these things start. It is with protest, with solidarity, with boycotts and direct action. And we'll get to more of that in a second. But go on, Asa. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to make the point about this Japanese conglomerate, which I also had not heard of, but it is this massively important global conglomerate. It's I read this in the Fortune 500. Itochu. There's 2 points to me about the significance of this. Is first of all, as you mentioned, the impact of the ICJ ruling. Like, we see that already, and we mentioned when we've had these discussions before about the impact of the ICJ ruling, that Israel is plausibly that South Africa has a plausible case that Israel is carrying out a genocide in the Gaza Strip, and that Israel must stop those actions. There were people, understandably, who got frustrated with the ICJ that it didn't explicitly use the word ceasefire. Although, I mean, really, the implication of the only, as the South Africans said afterwards, the only way the ruling can be implemented is through a ceasefire. But we're starting to see the material benefits of that ruling, already in these examples you've laid out there, and in your new article. I think it's really important. And this is, I mean, we've all been reporting, all three of us have been reporting on the BDS movement for many years, and especially since the Palestinian call for BDS in 2005. And I mean, I don't know about you two, but I can't remember a time ever. I mean, there may be one that I can't recall, but I can't remember a time ever when there's been a BDS. I mean, there's so many BDS victories we've reported on over the years, but I can't remember a single time when one of these corporations explicitly said, "Yeah, this is about Israel. This is about these issues. This is a result of what is happening to the Palestinians." And they're not even, you know, even this, they're not necessarily doing it in a particularly moral way, but they are explicitly confirming it is because of this, and the protest does make a difference. Because normally they try and get out of it and say, well, it had nothing to do. Sometimes they've explicitly said the opposite. Oh, it had nothing to do with the protesters.
Right,
It was
just a
just
contract
commercial.
issue. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
Even when we
commercial.
know it did, yeah.
Right,
Even when we
right.
know it
Even
did.
though we know that in reality it did. But I can't remember this ever happening before where they've explicitly said, yeah, this is because of, you know, we support the Japanese government supports the work of the ICJ, of the World Court.
Yeah.
That's such a good point, Asa. I mean, you know, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS activists have always said, you know, it's nice when companies acknowledge that they're leaving Israel or boycotting Israel or ending business in Israel. And there have been big companies that have done that as a result of campaigns. Conglomerates like Veolia, Orange, the big mobile communications firm, and others that have left Israel over the years precisely because of activism. But as you've said, Asa, they don't say it's because of that activism. And the response of BDS organizers has always been, well, it doesn't really matter as long as they leave. We know why they left. They know why they left. But I do agree, it takes it to another level when you have companies like this saying, yeah, it's because of the ICJ decision. And so it may well be that we're entering a new phase where things will accelerate. And I certainly hope so in terms of this kind of action.
Ali, you also wrote about a kind of a ad hoc consumer boycott against McDonald's, and how a major, I think it was the CEO that had to admit that its profits were being dented.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting story because McDonald's Corporation, and we all know who McDonald's is, they held their quarterly sales call, or their quarterly call with investors earlier this week. And they acknowledged that they have suffered a significant loss of sales in the Middle East since the start of the genocide in Gaza, and not just in the Middle East. They were quite explicit in saying that it's much broader than that, and it's particularly in places where there are large Muslim consumer markets, including, and they cited specifically, Malaysia and Indonesia. Indonesia, of course, is the world's most populous Muslim majority country. But they also say, and this is, I'm quoting Chris Kempczinski, the CEO of McDonald's, he says, in a country, for example, like France, that has a larger Muslim population, we are seeing some impact. And he noted that in France, the drop in sales, quotes, depends very much on where the restaurant is located and if it's in a Muslim area. And that's very significant because it shows really the power of Muslim communities, not just in their own countries, but also in Europe and North America. And it's maybe a topic for another day, but in the United States now, we see Muslim organizations and communities organizing against Biden to deny him the vote in the in the upcoming U.S. elections. But this shows that it has a real impact. And while McDonald's wouldn't put a dollar figure on it, they were very explicit that it is a significant impact on their profits across the region. And they said that they didn't expect things to get better until the war ends.
Right.
And
yeah, sorry, and I just want to point out the reason why people have been boycotting McDonald's. Yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is on a number of levels. That, let's say, there's McDonald's specific issues, and then I think there's a broader response. The McDonald's specific issues is, as many people may know, McDonald's business model is franchising. The vast majority of McDonald's restaurants you see are not owned and operated by McDonald's Corporation. They're owned and operated by franchisees who have to invest a lot of their own money to buy and set up these restaurants. And then they share the profits with McDonald's. They pay royalties to McDonald's. And so that's how the company makes most of its money. So in Israel, the McDonald's Israel franchise, after October 7th, announced that they were giving away thousands of free meals to the Israeli soldiers taking part in the genocide in Gaza. And this produced a huge backlash across the region, in Arab countries and in Turkey in particular. And some of the McDonald's franchises in those countries tried to counter it by distancing themselves from what McDonald's Israel had done. And some of them even announced that they were giving sums of money in support of humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza. But it didn't work because people, and you hear this argument. I'll say more about this, but I just came back a couple of days ago from Jordan, and the argument you hear sometimes from business people is, well, yes, it's McDonald's, but it's locally owned and operated, and the employees are local people, so we shouldn't punish them. But people didn't buy that, and McDonald's had to admit that it has suffered a significant business impact. Again, not just in the Middle East, not just in Malaysia and Indonesia, but in other countries where there are significant Muslim populations, showing their consumer power. And the other company that's been affected, that admitted it's been affected, is Starbucks. Again, another iconic brand name. And they had to admit that they've taken a hit. They claim to be, neutral. They say we have no political agenda. But in fact, what happened a few weeks ago was that the Starbucks Workers Union put out a tweet in support of Palestinian rights, and the Starbucks Corporation repudiated it and actually sued the union for infringing on its trademark, because they said the union's logo and name are too similar to Starbucks, and people will confuse their position with Starbucks. But in fact, Starbucks was pandering to right-wing anti-Palestinian media and politicians in the United States who objected to the tweet by the Starbucks Workers Union. So far from being neutral, Starbucks was actually rejecting support for Palestinian rights and trying to appease the right wing. What it actually did was it enraged everyone, and as a result of boycotts by supporters of Palestinian rights and by opponents of Palestinian rights, it saw a measurable drop in its business and revenues. But I think there's a bigger picture here. So you can point at those specifics related to McDonald's and Starbucks, but I think what's mostly driving this is a general revulsion at the role of the United States and the West. And this kind of consumer boycott is one of the few direct ways people have of making decisions which they see as supporting Palestinian rights and punishing the countries or governments or corporations they see as responsible. So when I was in Jordan, and I just came back a few days ago to the United States, it's very apparent that boycotting McDonald's, and not just McDonald's, but pretty much every major American brand and some European brands like Carrefour, the supermarket chain, and Nescafe is now a cultural norm, to the extent that, you know, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, which were extremely popular in Jordan, you don't see them at restaurants anymore. People are now serving local alternatives or other brands which are not in the public mind associated with the United States. And that's become the norm. If you were to walk around with a Coca-Cola, people would be upset at you. And you'll hear people saying, oh, yeah, you know, that you drive past McDonald's and it's empty, and that's very satisfying to them. So I think this is part of a bigger phenomenon that is not necessarily about the specifics of those countries, but just a general rejection of these brands and saying, you know, we want to make known to the United States that there is a price, there are consequences for your role in this genocide.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, Ali, for giving us those reports. And of course, we're going to continue to follow the consumer boycotts and the divestment, maneuvers by major corporations, and of course, sanctions. I mean, it's quite a time for people to be able to move the boycott movement like they've been doing recently.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.